And we're back. Did you miss me? Of course you did. We are still reading Almost Odis by me, Dusty Thompson. Whoop. Wearing my sweater because it's sweater weather out here in California. I'm very excited. Loving life. So if you're following along, we are on page 314. We are almost at the very, very end. So I should warn you, some of this stuff is a little less funny and a little more painful, but it's reality, and I think we all know how painful reality can be. So here we go. The one thing the dad never recovered from is the death of my mother. He went from someone so closed off it seemed he had no feelings to someone who cried regularly, almost overnight. I say overnight when, truth be told, I hadn't had much interaction with him outside of holiday meals and the occasional talk to your father handoff during my mother's weekly phone calls. On their first anniversary, about 3 months after she died, I called to see how he was and to give he and I a chance to reminisce about the happy memories. He couldn't handle the conversation and was upset at me for reminding him she was gone and that it was their anniversary. He couldn't deal with it. Here we are 14 years later and the hurt seems to be fresh. The feeling's right at the surface. It takes little to make him cry. When he does cry, he gets mad at himself for crying and lashes out at whomever is there. Me if I'm around, himself if I am not. When he lashes out, it is to cause pain because he says things he cannot possibly believe. He once told me his hurt is far worse as her husband than ours as her children could be. He's mad at God for taking her away from him. He sees her death as some form of punishment for what sin he will not say. When I question his thinking, he looks at me startled at even the idea that he may be wrong. When I ask him why he thinks God works like that, he can't say. He spent 30 years sitting, living, eating, talking to, and sleeping beside one of the strongest Christians, and he doesn't seem to have learned anything about the character of Christ. Did he listen when she prayed out loud? I question him to help him heal. He feels it is disrespectful. When I counter with, you know what Wayne would say, he quickly changes the subject and I acquiesce as you can't perform therapy on family members if they are unwilling, especially if you aren't a therapist. He won't talk to anyone at the VA. He started talking to a psychologist and was actually starting to improve, in my opinion, when he told me a story one night, as usual, apropos of nothing. He asked if I'd ever heard of soldiers in Vietnam who collected the ears of Vietnamese they had killed during the night. Having worked at the VA for 16 years, I had and answered affirmatively. He continued his story stating he had done that on numerous occasions. Not knowing what to say, I simply sat there, surprised not only by what he was saying, but also by the fact that he was saying anything. He had never revealed anything about his service other than he was in the Army at the same time as Elvis and had enjoyed Germany right alongside him. He had also shared that his parents had spent all the money he had sent home to save to buy a car when he finished his military time. His lifelong generosity explained in one comment remembrance. When I asked him why they spent his money, he said when he asked them, they stated we needed it. Giving is his way of showing love, and I now knew why. My silence concerned him, and he asked, "Are you ashamed of me for doing that?" I said, "No. You were doing a job you were trained to do. It was a different time and a difficult situation. There's no need to be ashamed." He looked at me surprised and said, "You don't hate me?" Just as surprised, I said, "Why would I hate you? You were doing what you thought was the right thing at the right time. Of course, I don't hate you." He just sat and looked at me, seemingly unable to comprehend what I was saying, but he said nothing else. I stood and hugged him, saying, "I love you, old man," and quickly left the room, having breached protocol. About a week or so later, he announced he was stopping his visits to the shrink. When I asked why and mentioned he had been making great progress and seemed to be less unhappy and depressed, he replied, "She makes me remember stuff I want to forget. I don't care how pretty she is, can't go no more." When he stopped, he began to regress quickly. He had dredged up many memories and he didn't know how to deal with it and did not want my or anyone else's assistance. Trying to help only made it worse as he reminded me I had started all this and he accused me of looking down on him like I was better than him. One question he always asked and I never answered was, "Why'd God take your mama and not me?" There is no answer. I don't know. No one knows. My mother died of complications from sarcoidosis, a lung condition, even though she never smoked. Ironically, the dad smoked for almost 60 years and has emphysema and has had 8, by his count, heart attacks, but is still chugging slowly along. My sister and my mother's sisters have never forgiven him for not quitting smoking when my mother was so ill and couldn't breathe. He got upset when he stopped smoking several years later and no one congratulated him. It was one of the requirements I placed before he moved in. I'm glad he stopped when he did, but it begs the question, if he loved her as much as he says he did, and does, why didn't he stop then? Why now? It's the main reason my sister does not communicate with him outside of the holidays. I can't really blame her, I just don't bring it up. It's a conversation that goes unspoken each time he decides to ask why my sister doesn't call except on his birthday and Father's Day or any holiday when she is not visiting me. He complains incessantly that no one calls him on the phone. However, as soon as someone does, he immediately gets antsy and tries to figure out how to hang up as quickly as possible. He doesn't really want to talk, he just wants to be remembered. My refrain for the longest time was, if you want someone to call you, don't spend the entire time when they do call complaining about the fact they never call. It's literally the reason they don't call, and it's inaccurate because they called you. Surely you know that. It's never what he wants to hear. He wants deference and a respect for his position as the dad. It's how we always behaved growing up. I assume it was how my mother was with him. I don't remember. Now that I often feel like the parent, it has shifted the dynamic of our relationship, and I am still determined to honor my father as much as I can, but it can be difficult. I guess I've never stopped trying to earn his acceptance, even when I mostly have it. Old habits die hard. I want him to have a good life in his later years. Life has not been fair to him. He grew up in poverty with selfish parents and worked himself into the ground to provide for us. He was absolutely screwed over by Chevron, who my sister hates to this day, when he hurt his back offshore and when he got his settlement check. He was also underpaid by workers' compensation while he was waiting for the trial and the settlement. His monthly Social Security check is lower than it should be based on his earnings, or at least this is his monthly refrain. He remains bitter and obsessed with money, absolutely obsessed with it as he equates money with self-worth. Guilty. I agree with his lament that he shouldn't have to rely on family for his housing in his old age, but what can you change? You must stand what you can't change, you must stand, but he seems content to wallow in self-pity. If you wonder from which parent I inherited my flair for the drama, it is the dad for sure. Life's a bitch and then you die, is his favorite saying. He repeats it almost daily, sometimes hourly, and it's hard to take the repetition and complete lack of interest in how this affects those around him. If I try to focus on the good, he'll improve his attitude somewhat, but typically it's only changed for the length of that particular conversation, or during a really good meal. Otherwise, he seems to thrive on anger and woe in equal measure. But the reality is, no matter what happens to you, you should get over it and move on. You can't expect life to always be fair. If I let everything bad that's happened to me keep me down in the dumps, I would never have a good day. For real. But he chooses to stay in the same headspace and to wallow, and it's not up to me to fix him. I tried. And we'll leave it there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.